So in terms of reconciliation then, so it says there, if the results are really important, e.g. national tax collection, then a blockchain solution may be appropriate. So within this is really two key ingredients. Firstly, the intrinsic importance. So it's kind of obvious that national tax is a really important thing. Also, think about the scale of this thing. If you're looking at something at national scale like a national tax system, then it's obvious there's millions and millions of potential counterparties and just sheer scale of this problem. So alongside this, a number of national governments are considering blockchain use regarding the payment of corporation tax. Again, intrinsically important and at national scale just a huge problems. So blockchain solution might be appropriate for things like questions over the amount of tax paid and have the relevant financial audits been conducted correctly. So the overarching aim in this case would be to improve the quality of the data record and to reduce the mutual costs of tax collection and tax compliance. So you don't often think about it in these terms, but there's a certain cost of tax collection for governments and also tax compliance for companies, aside from just the actual payment of the tax. Another thing that's important here is value transfer. It's important here to remember that this thing is grounded in computer science historically, and when we say value, what we really might mean is information. So in terms of value transfer, going deeper than that, the basic question you're asking is, could the thing function in terms of an advanced robot? So Shreya 2020 asked, does the process or activity involve transfer of value or information? And alongside this, it's not restricted to purely monetary notions of value. So for instance, in the original Bitcoin blockchain, this used noughts and ones to signify payment and receipt of payment, but this could equally mean other things. So value transfer really refers to the transfer of information. So this might apply to non-monetary things as well. So non-monetary examples might include things like medical patient records and digital identity profiles. So these were important before this year, but might be of increased importance now given what's in the news, because you can imagine something like medical patient records might be even more important now during the pandemic, and digital identity profiles might be even more important with things like the supply chain, monitoring the supply chain with respect to things like Brexit. So in terms of immutability, the question here is the requirement the data record be unchangeable and essentially there forever? And immutability is an integral feature of blockchain and one of the key original motivations. There's a number of practical examples of when immutability might be attractive beyond currencies. Things like if you're buying a used car, want a clear and comprehensive record of past repairs and any past mechanical issues. Similarly, if you were buying an expensive piece of art and you wanted to be sure of the provenance, you want a clear record of previous owners to ensure it is genuine. Alongside this issue of maintaining provenance, I'm aware that there's some contemporary examples of checking for anti-slavery measures and verifying that any labour processes satisfy certain standards. Other examples I can think of might include Brexit and ensuring that supply chain conditions are met, vaccination records during a pandemic. So both these things are potentially very important and very pertinent. I'm sure there's all sorts of examples that you could imagine there as well. So potentially there's all sorts of things that you could use a blockchain application for if you had this requirement that the data record be unchangeable and immutable, and that was really important. So there are a number of blockchain applications in this list here. So this is not exhaustive, but hopefully gets the main point across. Hopefully you can see here that blockchain is potentially much more than just the technical gubbins that underpins Bitcoin. So big long list here. So I've asked questions on this in the past in exams and coursework. We'll probably do the same this year. Note here lots and lots of different areas in this listing. Okay, potentially other blockchain applications as well. So possible blockchain applications then include financial services, health, energy and food, real estate, the environment, organisations and governance, education and government. Okay, so potentially wider range of applications, much more than just being the technical gubbins underpinning Bitcoin. Okay, so in lots of these cases what you really want is consensus in a potentially trustless environment, and you should be able to see that in all these applications listed they do indeed satisfy all these elements of the Oxford blockchain framework. So in terms of financial services then, so it's important to state first of all that when I say financial services I mean much more than just being the technical underpinnings behind Bitcoin. So yes, blockchain does provide technical support for Bitcoin, but it's potentially much more than that. So financial services and services business more generally operates across data streams, and the idea would be that blockchain can make them more efficient. So the idea here would be that financial services business in particular could unlock new capabilities by using blockchain to benefit commerce and society, and there's potentially lots of different ways that this could be useful. And it says here blockchain applications span both consumer facing and institution facing domains. Now it's natural, I think, in terms of finance, if you see the word consumer facing, to think of things like high street banking. Okay, it's much more general than that, although these are the sorts of things that are generally visible in real life. And then institution facing domains, really this is big transactions between banks or other financial institutions, and the sheer size and importance of it renders blockchain solution important. So as we said throughout this lecture course, a historical perspective is very important. Throughout history, financial services were predicated on serving as intermediaries and extensive record keeping. So this is almost in the DNA of the whole subject of accounting and finance. You know, valued professions, esteemed professions such as accountants, auditors, bankers, etc. Okay, almost completely predicated on some element of record keeping. Now, blockchain developments were in part done so as a protest against aspects of the contemporary financial system. So there's a sense in which there are imperfections in the status quo, and some blockchain solutions were mooted as a potential solution to that. And blockchain is variously intended to provide trust in trustless environments, as we've said, and transparent record keeping. So going back to the contemporary imperfections that the whole blockchain system is designed to rail against, so common examples here would be the 2008 crash, and a more deep-seated example would be the progressive devaluation of national currencies like the US dollar and the UK pound sterling over a number of years. So in terms of consumer facing applications then, so this isn't just high street banking. I think this is really the sorts of transactions that are visible to the layman in general terms. So the cryptocurrencies are but the first possible application of blockchain technology, but arguably ruined by excessive price volatility. So this is similar to historical episodes of bubbles and crashes, but arguably more excessive due to peculiarities about these cryptocurrency markets and their potential for completely collapsing. Payments might be another key motivation. So the key example that's often cited is the potential for reduction of transaction costs and the time involved with overseas transfers. So I think you could reasonably argue that this is an issue where there's long been a sort of technological deficit rather in the banking system, especially with regard to overseas transactions and the transfer of money. And then digital lending, banking, insurance. So distributed applications or smart contracts could variously be used to automate things like lending, credit underwriting, payment of interest, insurance contracts, etc. Okay, so potentially very, very broad customer-facing applications. So in terms of institutional applications, so think of these as being sort of very large transactions occurring between bank to bank. These are potentially ginormous transactions and so important enough to warrant a blockchain solution. There's long been a technological deficit in banking systems up until surprisingly recently. These worked by post, for example. So in terms of institutional applications, so it's natural to look at things like settlement and clearing involving fund transfer and updating of records. And alongside this, Shria 2020 emphasises the potential for blockchain to be used in very large value transfers. So the sheer size of the transaction means that the thing is sufficiently important to warrant its own blockchain solution. Now, another possibility that has been mooted here, also discussed in Shria 2020, is the potential for automatic settlement of derivatives contracts. So this works in an analogous way to the potential for automated insurance contracts that was discussed earlier with respect to customer-facing applications. So again, a very, very broad list of potential applications, not just cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. So in terms of health, the health industry is beginning a range of experiments around blockchain that can lower costs and improve care. So most immediate applications relate to the management of patient data and medical records. So I think there's two key ingredients here. Firstly, this need to have a record that is absolutely correct, this sort of notion of consensus, and also this potential for an immutable record that cannot be changed and is there for eternity, essentially. Now, this is something that was deemed to be important before the pandemic. It's arguably the case that this could be even more important after the pandemic. Other opportunities exist in clinical research that can reduce costs and speed up time to market for new drugs. So remember that one of the key motivations behind blockchain is to try and establish trust in a potentially trustless environment, and it's easy to imagine that this facet of blockchain may be important in terms of clinical research, managing conflicting interests, etc. And it's thought that over time there is potential for blockchain to fundamentally change healthcare delivery. Okay, so I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a moment, but if this was important before the pandemic, it's only likely to grow in importance after the pandemic. Okay, so in terms of personal data in healthcare systems, so there's a trade-off between security and privacy versus quick access in emergencies, and Shria 2020 speaks of a sort of break glass in case of emergency capability that might be needed with medical records. There is a deep-seated problem in contemporary systems in terms of a lack of compatibility between existing electronic medical record systems. This is a big deal even now. There's some possibility that storing data on blockchain systems may ultimately make personal medical data more portable, and again this is a big deal even now. So it is thought that the transition from one medical provider to another, e.g. from the emergency department to ICU, is often a source of medical error fundamentally caused by an inability to transfer data across different systems correctly. So what you've got here is potentially a medical tragedy that's also at the same time a tragedy due to information management rather than medicine per se.